Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Fireside Chat on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, part of the Run, Try, Bike Everyday Athlete platform. I'm super excited about my guest today, and it's not because he's wearing a Mets hat, but because we're going to be talking about being in the Army, working on Wall Street and in corporate America, and leaving it all behind to chase mountain challenges, getting away from technology, and getting connected with the outdoors. Who am I going to be speaking with today? Kenneth Posner is who I'll be talking with, also known as Barefoot Ken. His list of accomplishments is super impressive. If you go to his website, you will see all sorts of accomplishments from 100 milers to bad water to peaks that he's climbing barefoot. It's amazing, and I can't wait to dive into all of those topics and more. But before I bring him on, please remember to subscribe, rate, review the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're using Spotify, you can also leave a comment for us. And please do so. It really does help us get great guests like Ken on the show. It helps us to inspire those who are listening to us or watching us on YouTube to bring more everyday athletes into the fold and show them that they too can do what everybody else is doing. So without more rambling from me, more stumbling over my words, let's bring Kenneth onto the show. Kenneth, thank you for joining me this evening. How are you?
I'm great, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
I am super excited to have you on the show. And we just chit-chatted for about 10 minutes before we came live here. And so we've sort of broken the ice, but I do have one question that I ask the vast majority of my guests when I do remember it. And the icebreaker question is pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Oh, I'll go for a big yay on that.
As a New Yorker?
Yeah. I just had a weird pizza. It was actually in Chicago. It was goat cheese and grapes.
Interesting.
And, the problem with that is the grapes rolled off the slice when you raised it and fell on the floor. So, pineapple chunks are square and they sit on the top and they do their job pretty well.
I didn't expect this to go down the path of food, but are there other fruits that you have put on your pizza that you care to share and may have enjoyed or didn't enjoy?
Well, I'm actually an Epicurean. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Epicurean means that you're into gourmet food and fine dining and drink. But if Epicurus were still around, he'd be sort of upset because he said the finest food is bread and water brought to hungry lips, like anything after you ran the Cocodona, right?
Yes, 100%.
So I'm not a big pizza person. I do like fruit. We have in the Hudson Valley, we have some great peaches right now. I would not put a peach on a pizza, but the peaches are very good. So I recommend those.
Fantastic. I just had figs on a pizza when I was here earlier this week. I'm in Manhattan, and so earlier this week, I had figs with some goat cheese and arugula on a pizza, and it was phenomenal. It was at Tavola, 37th and 9th, if anybody cares.
Oh, there was an at Tavola up where I live. They closed up here. I didn't know they were in the city. Well, I was, but by the way, I left the corporate world and I came back, so I still have a corporate job, and I was down there, and we were going to have a on-site meeting instead of remote. Yeah. So I said, if people actually show up, I'll provide treats. And of course, then I had to scramble to figure something out. So I went to a local store and I got figs, real figs. And people hadn't ever had a real fig before, except maybe for Fig Newtons. But they were good.
So as an Epicurean, you may know this, but I had no idea. But Brooklyn is a bastion for figs. They actually have two varieties. There's a Brooklyn white and a Brooklyn dark, a variety of fig. And I had no idea that was the case. But yes.
Okay, I'm surprised. I will keep an eye out for fig trees next time I'm in Brooklyn.
Exactly.
But that's great. Figs are good.
Well, hey, let's get into the show a little bit more since we're not on the Food Network. I mentioned that you were in the Army and you had a successful career on Wall Street, and you left it all behind to pursue life in the outdoors. And you've mentioned you've come back to corporate America. But was there one moment that made you sort of walk away? Was there sort of like a Jerry Maguire scenario where you took your goldfish and you walked out?
Yeah. And bear in mind, this was, for, many of your listeners will be a little bit younger than me. So this was in my mid 50s. And, I had a dream job for a former analyst. It was a private equity backed company. But it became apparent to me that, the upside wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined. And it wasn't so much financial, it was the opportunity to step up and do more. And I realized that many of my colleagues actually had real experience running companies, whereas I had only, written about them as an analyst. And so there was a ratcheting down of my expectations. And also, we were trying to make acquisitions, and the acquisition market got overheated, and the board was like, no, you're done. Time to put the company up for sale. So I had been drawing a lot of energy from my corporate job, and suddenly that energy reduced. And at the same time, over the years, I had done a lot of ultra running and other things, and had gotten really good at pushing myself, and also gotten a little bit older. So I set myself up for a cycle of chronic injuries, which is a risk for all of us, right? So I found both sides of my life, the energy was dropping. And, I remember Henry David Thoreau from Walden Pond, and he said, the majority of men live lives of quiet desperation, rightly or wrongly. And I realized all of a sudden that was about to be me, because my two sources of energy were both crashing. So that's when, I discovered this particular project, the Grid, which is a peak bagging project. And it seemed like it was time for me to go back to nature and get back to work on, figuring out who I was and giving myself a project that I could sink my teeth into and get that energy going again. So it was a weird sort of pivot, and I ended up taking a year off from work to get the project done. It was like I was in the desert, and it was really thirsty just for more time out in nature as a way to, learn what I needed to learn about who I was and what I was going to do next.
I'm gonna ask you a question that may be difficult to answer. So you were already an ultra runner. You're already outside. And so going outside would be the logical step, right?
Yeah.
Do you think if, corporate America and was winding down for you, and you were on the chess club or, in a book club, that it would have had the same impact? Like, I'm going to go read more books, or I'm going to go play more chess, as opposed to I'm going to go outside more?
And it's interesting. My job as an analyst was, mostly, I call it left brain type work. It's great work. It's exciting. It's like being on the hunt, trying to track down what's really going on, help people make decisions that matter a lot. But it's all left brain work. And so is the chess club and, the book club. And after a while, it's like, hey, my left brain is like become this huge muscle, and the rest of me is atrophying. That can't be all life. Not for me.
Yeah.
And maybe other people are, totally happy in a digital, left brain analytic kind of life. And maybe that's all they hope. But I had this, and continue to have this huge need for I call it the full mind body engagement, the intensity of, being alive.
I'm fascinated by you. We've been talking for less than 9 minutes in this episode already, because, you talk about left brain getting stronger and the rest of your body getting atrophied, which is, we're talking about imbalance, which is something that athletes talk about constantly. But I want to talk to you about balance in a different way. So you're exercising your brain and your body. Do you find at moments when you're out there running, or vice versa, you're at home and you're reading a book per se, that you have this feeling like, I need to go do the other thing instead now for another day or 2 days or whatever it might be, to balance that out for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. 1000%. And I'll tell you something too. It changes over time.
Yeah.
So as a young dude getting started on Wall Street, and with a young family too, there's times to, just focus on the work, right? But as I got into my, late 30s, early 40s, I started to see people getting sick. I got promoted a couple of times because people dropped by the wayside.
Yeah.
And the light bulb went off, and I was like, hey, I ought to pay attention to my own health. But then as I got into my 50s, capabilities change as you get old, and just spending all day in front of a computer or on the phone or whatever, it began to get really draining. And I began to feel, sort of sour. And I just needed that full, again, I call it the full mind body engagement. I need, it's like if you have a Ferrari, so I'm told you need to take it out at 150 miles an hour from time to time to clear out the carburetor. At least that's what they used to say. I don't know if those cars even have carburetors anymore. I just felt this huge need. And the strange thing is, like, I had been doing a lot of running and hiking and other things throughout my life, but the imbalance got to a point where I needed to just cut that out completely and almost spend full time for a year out there in the field, sort of rediscovering who the actual person was, beneath all the spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks.
That's fascinating, because I know in today's world, I read it almost on a regular basis, the new athlete who's getting involved, and they are constantly chasing that runner's high, which might be a finish line, might be a PR, might be a new distance, and they wind up getting injured because they don't take a moment to process what they've accomplished and let it settle in before starting up again. And I'd love to get so you can tell me about your scenario then. For those of you who are listening, Ken raised his hand.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's this concept of the right speed. And if you read the accounts of fighter pilots and race car drivers, of which I am not one, they talk a lot about managing yourself, managing the cognitive load and making your decisions very thoughtfully. But this is powerful stuff that we're dealing with. And the runner's high for me is not so much, you crest the hill and you get to run downhill for a little bit and it's like, wow, it feels easy. The runner's high is at the end of the race when you're like, hey, I did that.
Yes.
And the runner's high, if you go from race to race, okay, that runner's high starts to build and it becomes your entire life. Your entire life is a runner's high. And that's the goal, I think. That's how we're supposed to feel. And it doesn't mean that running or whatever else you do should take over your life and cause you to abandon your family and become a hermit. But it's very powerful stuff. And the question is, do you want to sacrifice that power? Or where at the margin do you want to sacrifice that power for the cubicle work, right?
Yep.
And by the way, if you're the CEO of a company, or if you're a scientist curing, cancer, or if you're a political leader, or is Elon Musk going to take time out to go run every weekend? I don't know. But if you have such, an important job, you make your decisions differently. But I think most of us, we have good jobs, but this other side of life is really important. So back to the injuries, that's execution. So yeah, you got to execute your mission properly so that you don't destroy yourself. That hopefully. Yeah, but I did, I got to that point where I developed chronic posterior tibialis tendonitis. And I was out of running for, a year, which was tragic, sort of. But that was part of what forced me to sort of reevaluate, where I was going.
I find sometimes, right, when we're put on the shelf, shall we say, like we gain perspective, which also leads to intelligence, right? It's like, I can't keep repeating this because I want to go out and run. I want to be out there, but if I just keep pressing the gas pedal, at some point I'm going to run out of gas, and that's not what I want. Which makes me inquisitive about your process of, you said it was 12 months that you were out of running, essentially. So how did you reframe your thinking when you were able to get back out there to the point where you didn't re-injure yourself?
Yeah. So, there's a couple things I could talk about. One is tactical execution procedures, right? So I developed a procedure which I borrowed from the financial services industry. This is going to sound nerdy because it is, but in the financial services industry, you keep track of risks with dashboards. Yep. Red, orange, yellow, green. These are just Excel spreadsheets with, formatted. So I started doing that in my training log, and I said, you know what, I'm now recovering. So I need to start tracking entries in my training log. And I don't want to be in the yellow or the red. for injuries. I want to be in the green. And so I added a second column, not just injuries, but irritation status, niggle status, right?
Yes.
And if I'm spending a lot of time in injured status, I need to start tracking niggles and getting out of the yellow and red there and into the green. So that kind of more formal way of tracking what I was doing was helpful in getting me to confront the reality that I was dealing with a more chronic situation. But then the second thing I did was I pivoted. And so I went away from the aggressive ultra running I've been doing towards peak bagging, which for your listeners is hiking up mountains. And I went away from races where you're trying to, if you're trying to do it in a time that you're pleased with. Whereas this project, you could take as long as you wanted, you could schedule the trips whenever it made sense. It was a different format, if you will. And that was a beautiful pivot because it accommodated my limited abilities at that point in time. And so one of the messages is you may have to change. If you can't run, you could swim, right? If you can't swim, you could walk, right? The other thing I was going to mention is you can set up big projects that take place over time.
Yeah.
That's an alternative to the focus on the individual race or the run. And that was very meaningful to me. And that's something which I continue to do. So I have new projects, even having finished the grid.
Do you think that today's society allows us to think long-term, where every time you open up your social media app, and I don't care which one it is, somebody's accomplishing something right this second, or at least it feels this way, right? Because the algorithm might be showing you something from a week ago. And so this idea that I'm going to be patient and work on bagging 14ers if you're out west, or 100 mountains like you've talked about on your website, which is going to take time, right? I wonder, and I wonder aloud often, which probably annoys my wife more than anything else, because I always ask the question, like, I wonder if people have patience the way they used to for their own accomplishments these days. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because you seem to be a very patient person.
So I'll give you a very concise answer. The answer is no. Right? The world is going to push you. And it's just the energy of life and the marketers and the government wanting you to do whatever they want. So the answer is no. The world will not support you in taking your time to figure out your life in any regards. Everybody will tell you what you're supposed to do. Right? And it's government, marketing, your family, your friends, your peers, all these folks, all 8 billion people on social media. So part of, thank you for saying I appear to be patient. And I am extremely patient prior to my first cup of coffee in the morning. But part of the grid was an exercise in patience. And a little voice in the back of my head was saying, Posner, you need to work on patience. And by the way, I'm a big fan of the transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson. So he has a famous quote. He says, lose the military hurry. And by the way, I was in the Army for a few years. So I understand that you will accomplish the objective and you must get there at the scheduled time. He said, lose the military hurry and adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. So the good news is you can learn patience. The bad news is it's going to be painful, right? I guess there are pills, right? There are pills that help people concentrate, and caffeine is, I don't know if it teaches patience, but it gives you more energy in the short term. But what I did was barefoot hiking and bushwhacking, off trail through very rugged terrain, and I would get very frustrated. Because, if you're, I don't know if you're in your folks, but try this in the San Gabriels outside of Los Angeles. Try going off trail. It's very thick and rugged, and you've got branches in the face. You can't see what you're stepping on. You've got tilty rocks. You could step into a hole. It's steep. If you're going 1 mile an hour, that's actually pretty good.
Right.
As a runner, I was used to that steady rhythmic speed. And I found the bushwhacking to be sometimes extremely frustrating, and barefoot as well, because I was used to going faster. So it took being humiliated, I guess, to some extent, to learn to go slow. So in other words, I concluded that it's often harder to go slow than it is to go fast, because you're swept along by life. Everybody's cheering for you to go fast. And when you finally confront the difficulty of going slow, it's quite aggravating. But that was a huge turning point for me, because I won't say I'm perfectly patient now. But I learned, and John Muir, right? So he's one of your neighbors out there in California, and he wrote in his diaries when he was in the High Sierra, he talked about running down from some mountain he had visited back to camp. And talk about runner's high. He was just ecstatic with the beauty of the mountains and the energy, and he was running, downhill. And he got back to camp and he wrote in his diary, "So ends a day that will never end." And I read that and I was like, how does a day never end? And I think the point he was making is that the experiences we have are permanent. They change us, they change other people. They may be big or small, but it's a little bit of a different mindset when you can take a step back and say, I'm not rushing through this race. I'm creating this experience with certain goals, and it's part of a journey that I'm on. And part of this is age too. Because when I was young, I didn't think like this, because you don't know. And when you're young, you're just trying to figure out. But right now I'm working on a 1,000 Mountains project. And it's going to be a multi-year process. And I'm thinking about, how do I want to be spending my time, and how do I continue to age without destroying myself?
Right.
So the multi-year project gives me some structure and some framework to make, good decisions, hopefully.
Yeah. You mentioned age, and I think about that often. I'm 51. I'll be 52 at the end of this year. And the person that I was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is not the same person I am today. And I've gained perspective over that time. And one of the things that I feel like I can say today is I'm patient about growing this business that I have, because I'm doing it my way. Now, if you had asked me that 5 years ago when I started this company, there is 0% chance that I would have had that same feeling. It would have been like, we got to hit this revenue goal number and this margin goal number and this other revenue, all these things. And over time, it's just changed so much. And I've been telling people this often, and I'd love to get your thought process on how life has changed for you. Is I used to think I'm going to be this entrepreneur that I'm going to get phone calls from the Wall Street Journal because I built this thing from scratch to where it is today. And instead, I get tagged in pictures of people eating Oreos or eating pineapple on pizza and all of these things that I would never have imagined. And yet I enjoy it more. I'm not sitting behind the spreadsheet trying to figure out margins and revenue and all of those other things. And for me, that's happened in the last 2 years. So for you, when we talk about aging, was there a moment within there that you were like, yeah, when I was 50, 52, 54, whatever that number is, where you could feel that switch, that change?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jason. And, we need some of each, right? And the judgment comes on, how much energy you put into the margins and that sort of stuff. I'm still very goal focused. And by the way, congratulations on starting and building out your business, because I think entrepreneurism is the highest, level of accomplishment. As much fun as I have working in the corporate sector, I think that's really cool. I think it's more gradual, although what I would say is that grid experience I had, again, that big project, that led to significant changes. And maybe the changes were different for me than what you've been experiencing. For example, the grid pushed me in the direction of going very minimalist.
Okay.
So it made me rethink, the nature versus technology discussion. And I think, there's a mix of intensity. I guess the question is when to be intense and when to back off and give yourself a little bit of a break. And it's what it is? It's about pacing too, right? As runners, we understand you can't overdo things.
I'm gonna say something, and they will tell you this 1,000 times over. Like, you don't ask something of somebody if you don't know the answer to, right? The old lawyer concept. But I presume you have a degree in economics or business of some sort because you worked on Wall Street finance, but you have a note about you that lends to the philosophical side. And I wonder if that's like, how did those two things come to be within your world?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I think that's just, I was an English major.
Okay.
So I've always enjoyed, writing or and reading. But, I don't, I'm trying to figure out how to move one foot forward at a time. And I know more about myself, but not everything. I guess you can. By the way, when I was out in the mountains, I met my inner demon.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, one of the things about being out in the mountains, you clear out the social media and the noise, right?
Yes.
And I think there's a more primitive mindset, which, and people talk about this, feeling more connected with the environment, more part of the environment. And by the way, the barefoot is great for that because suddenly you're another animal prowling through the forest.
Yeah.
And if you're out there, you start to have the opportunity to listen to little voices and maybe occasionally see a faint image that maybe you would have missed in the day-to-day or at the book club or at the chess club or whatever. And so one day I realized there was an inner demon who was always cracking the whip on me, right? And the inner demon was the spirit of a former long dead scout who was mad that he could no longer run. Now, that probably sounds a little bit, I mentioned my posterior tibialis tendon, so you might be going, I wonder where he got that idea from. But still, it was a face and a name to put on a feeling I had, that energy that was getting slightly out of control. And so I just had a different perspective on that part of myself. It just occurred to me when I was out on a mountain, wishing that it would be spring already instead of snow and I could move faster. So I don't think any of us can ever understand, completely how we work, but we can get little clues that you maybe are not going to read about on social media. You maybe just have to let yourself be open to some of the older ways of learning about yourself.
You mentioned, barefoot, being in the mountains, connecting, but you've also run the New York City Marathon, you've run the Boston Marathon, you've run Badwater as well, which is a road race in and of itself. I've paced and crewed at Badwater.
Oh, cool. Uh-huh. And you heard about Bob Becker, right?
No, I did not.
Oh, Bob Becker. Bob Becker just ran Badwater at age 80, becoming the oldest person, and with Lisa Smith Batchen and Marshall Ulrich and his crew, they're all heroes, right? They're all amazing, amazing people.
We had the privilege of interviewing Marshall Ulrich's son, because they had written a book together, and so we interviewed him when this podcast first launched, like 2 or 3 years ago, which was fascinating because they did the adventure racing that was on Amazon at the time. So they were kayaking and mountain biking and all of those things. It was really fascinating. But the question I wanted to ask you with regards to road racing versus being in the mountains and the inner demon, do you think you would have had that same conversation, shall we say, with the inner demon if you were not in the mountains and you were running through New York or Boston or name any other city in America?
No. And by the way, I love road racing. And by the way, I'm more competitive, if you can use that word, on the roads. But here's the interesting thing about the roads. I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tangent because I want to make this point about technology and how much it controls our lives. When you're running through the mountains, by the way, there are some people who are really good at moving off trail.
Yes.
I'm not necessarily one of them. But you're moving on rugged terrain. You're barefoot. You have no map, compass, or GPS. You have no food or water with you, right? That's old school.
Yeah.
Now you go to a road race where, first of all the obstacles have been cleared. So you have the flat, smooth, straight or more or less straight. There's no question about where to go. And you have food and water if you want it, and your GPS watch. And now the activity of moving through the mountains, the natural activity, has turned into all muscle and cardio. Right. I'm sure elite athletes have strategies for running marathons, but most of us, it's just go and pace yourself. And I love that stuff. It's great fun, but it's a one dimension. It's almost like the left brain. It's a one-dimensional activity. So not in my experience, I wouldn't expect to hear those voices the way I think they're more accessible out in the woods, in the mountains.
And I think because in typical road racing, right, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of people as well.
It's ego and clock driven.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
And then when you're in the mountains and you're on your own at times, especially like if you're running a 100-miler, you've run Leadville. I've paced and crewed at Leadville.
Mm-hmm.
You're out there in the woods, as a runner for 50 or 60 miles before you get a pacer in most 100-mile events. And so you have a lot of time to process a lot of different thoughts. And if you're lucky enough to remember them when you're done, you can act upon them. Whereas I believe when road racing, you're, again, to your point, it's ego and time, and that's all you're focused on typically. And you might say, oh, this muscle feels a little sore right now, but you push through it and you keep going. Whereas when you're in the mountains for hours on end and the sun comes up for a second time, you start questioning, why am I still out here? And why am I still going through this process? So I do think that it would be a different conversation than you would get on the road, for sure.
Yeah, Hope Pass, 12,600 feet. When I did it, they had a big sign at the base. It said, go big or go home.
Yeah.
And I just barely made the cutoff on the far point. But that was a real learning experience because I had to reach down and say, hey, look, you're starting to fall behind. There are cutoffs. This is do or die.
Yeah.
And that, I don't want to, get, macho and ableist, but in the Army, we used to say, suck it up, buttercup, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the right thing to say to a lot of people in a lot of situations. But in these kinds of events, you're learning to operate yourself. You're learning, where you can push and where you can't. And it's not like learning how to make a complicated chess move. It's much simpler, but it's about being in control of yourself. It's about agency. And I just don't think you can ever do enough of it. It depends. Some of us, I guess I would say, some of us need more work, which would be me, right? But as long as you want to keep going, I think unless you are totally confident in your ability to operate yourself, you need to keep training.
We mentioned a number of different events: Badwater, Leadville, New York, Boston. It's going to be like picking your favorite kid for a parent, but is there an event out there that you could pick just one that stands out against the others, and why?
Badwater was a huge focus for me. And I ran it twice, and then I went out and ran the double.
Oh, okay.
And I tried to do the quad, but my training didn't go well, and that's when the injuries happened. I think goals are so important. To me, goals produce the energy, and they can produce a lot of energy. And I remember thinking about Badwater, and it was like, this is crazy. How can people run through, 120-degree temperatures in the middle of the desert?
It is crazy.
But then back in the day, they gave you 60 hours. So I looked at that and I said, okay, you've got some time. You could run hard at night and then just be careful during the day. And that gave me just enough of a glimmer to start to imagine that maybe I could do it. And then Lisa Smith-Batchen was my coach, so she helped me get to the first finish line. But that really took over my mind for a number of years. And it's so beautiful out there. And it was such a dramatic kind of thing to go out and do. It sounded so crazy, but there was a way to do it.
Yes.
And once I had a sense of that, it was just all I could think about. Let me ask you, Jason, is there an event, same question to you, what event have you been involved in that has had the biggest impact on you?
A Cocodona, for sure.
Uh-huh.
And it's 250 plus miles, which is amazing, but you're on your own, to your point earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's, little food unless you're carrying it with you. There's little drink unless you're carrying it with you. And you start to process life. You start to think about different components in life, and not so much like, what the hell am I doing out here? Like, this is bananas. But what am I going to change when I'm done? What am I going to alter when I cross that finish line? Because I'm learning a lot about myself. And I think that's one of the beauties that I love about 100 milers and up. Like I've said to people, I'm more of a candle than a match. Like 5Ks scare me. Like running a hard 5K for 22 minutes scares me way more than, taking 23 hours to run a 100 miler. Because to your point, you get away from social media, you get away from technology, and it's just you out there, and you get to think and you get to process and you get to finish. And when you get to finish, and I've had a DNF at a 100 miler as well. So even though I didn't cross the finish line, when it was finished, you're able to reflect on all of those things and say to yourself, okay, what can I change? What did I learn that I no longer need, that is no longer serving me, that I can put to the side and move forward in life? I just find that to be one of the best parts of trail and ultra running. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. By the way, I don't know that I have an interest in running Badwater, but I have told anybody who would listen, if you need pacer and crew, I will be happy to be part of that team, because that was an amazing experience to be a part of. That whole race through the landscape that you get to see, and then the finish on Whitney, which is completely different than everything you've seen for all the previous hours. It's really remarkable. And if anybody has the chance to volunteer or pace at that event, they absolutely should do it.
I agree. When I was doing the double on the way back, I was starting to fall apart slightly. At that point, I couldn't really talk much at all. And my pacer, Deanna Culbreth, she was like, "Come on, Ken, let's run." And there was ferocious headwinds. My one of my crew chiefs, Lynn, was. She just put her arm around my shoulder. She said, "Ken, the winds are terrible. I'm so sorry." But so here we were trying to do a 4 mile an hour walk and slipping behind. And Deanna was like, let's just try running. And I was like, no, it can't be done. But then she started trotting, and I said, I'll try, to myself. And it was the hardest thing I had ever done. But then I realized my heart rate wasn't that high. I wasn't out of breath. It wasn't hard physically to trot at 5 miles an hour, 12-minute mile. It was just hard to get the system going.
Yeah.
If I made the effort, it happened. And so we moved a little bit faster, and the run ended up being successful in part because of her. But those kinds of lessons, and every race you do teaches you a little bit about just making the effort, and then it, and that becomes a permanent part of your life. It's just how you build your life. But by the way, when I was doing the grid, and this took me 2 years to really get the thing done. And the first year was just the excitement of getting out into the mountains and learning more about them. But the second year I was thinking, okay, I'm going to be going back to the corporate world, probably. Okay, how am I integrating this back into the corporate world? And the answer eventually was, you take the energy and the joy and the pain and frustration of the mountains, right? And you bring that level, that resets you. That teaches you, again, this is life. It can be great, it can suck. That's the range.
Yes.
And then you bring that back to your day job, and you figure out how to find the passion in the day job too. And also, if it's not there, it's not a good job. It's not the right thing to be doing.
Right. And I think you become less fearful of leaving when you realize, like, this is not the right fit for me. I need to go find something else to do. I think you become less fearful of walking away after you've gone through some of these experiences that we go through when we're out on a mountain or in Badwater and in extreme heat. Like, we learn a lot more about ourselves, and we realize I can do the hard thing, like quitting a job and getting out away from a scenario that doesn't suit you anymore is not hard in the grand scheme of things, right?
Unless you're scared. But so let me ask you, Jason, did you leave a corporate setting before coming to start your business, or were you doing something else and you had to make that switch?
I was doing something else. I was working for a company called Travel Host at the time, and the owner of the company got a phone call, handed me the phone, and said, "This is for you." There was a business for sale called Texas Triathlete, Texas Runner and Triathlete was the name of the magazine. And I talked to the owner, and I got off the phone. We talked twice, and I handed the phone to my mentor, and I said, "I don't need to buy that business. I can start it on my own."
Yeah.
And it was as if lightning struck me.
Yeah.
Like the inspiration struck me. So I was super excited. Let's go. And then I said to myself, but wait a minute, starting a media company to compete with Ultra Running Magazine or Women's Running or Runner's World, that's not really all that smart if you don't have a plan. And so I decided that I needed to plan, and who I needed to talk to needed to be different than what they were doing. And I equated that to having been one of the very few people that I know or have ever heard of who was racing a 100-miler at the start of a year and then racing an Ironman at the end of the year. So I was doing a 100-miler and an Ironman in the same year. And so that gave me the inspiration, like I can do hard things, so I can do this business. I can do hard things, so I can do this business my way, as opposed to following in another company's footsteps. And so as I went down that path of launching this business, it was sort of moving away from that company and into my own world, and then off and running for sure.
That's great. I think I have the highest respect for entrepreneurs, because you're stepping into the unknown, and there's no guarantees. There's no corporate ladder. You got to make it. You got to make it work.
And I think the lessons that we learned through, whether it's Ironman training or 100-miler training, is to pivot. And that's one of the things that I've taken from that world of endurance sports to this company, where we might be doing something a particular way, and let's say it has initial success and then it starts to fizzle out. Instead of continuing to do it, you pivot and you try something new and you try something different. And I think like when you're climbing a mountain, let's say, and it's not going really well, you might take a moment to stop and say, where are my electrolytes? What am I eating? What am I drinking? Is it too much? Is it too little? And you change the plan on the fly, for example. And I think, I take that into running this business as well, is that it's okay to change. And I think that's what these sports have taught me.
Yeah, I remember some of the first lessons I learned are just so important. Things like it's okay to be tired, right?
Right.
Go and kick yourself. Start thinking about, okay, if I'm tired, how can I address that? Caffeine, rest, calories. Just be pragmatic. And we all struggle with maybe sometimes a little bit too much internal drama. And when you go out and practice in these higher stress environments, you just get a little bit better.
I wanted to ask you, we've mentioned the grid a handful of times, and you've written a book that, the book is called The Grid. Had you always wanted to write a book? And if you did always want to write a book, was this the book you thought you might write?
Well, I'd written a couple of other ones before. So I've been a sort of writer. And I think writing is a great discipline to help you clarify your thoughts. I think it's especially important in the world of AI, right? You don't want to become dependent on a machine clarifying your thoughts for you, maybe. So I had written a book I did a through run when I turned 50 in New York, the long path, 350 miles. So that book was called Running the Long Path. And that was a life-changing experience. I realized I needed a little bit more in the way of calories. It was 9 days. It was supposed to be 7. And as it became clear it was going to be 9 days, I didn't have any more cachets. So I was so hungry afterwards. But then, you learn where the real boundaries are. But that was just a life-changing experience. And it wasn't just the running, but I discovered some of the voices of history that are associated with the long path. It's actually, the name was inspired by Walt Whitman's poetry, The Long Brown Path. And then I wrote a business book. But when I started The Grid, I knew I could tell it was going to be a very meaningful, very intense experience. And so as a writer, I think when you have those kinds of experiences, you want to share them. Right. You could write a book about probably running a 5K. That'd be hard to stretch it out. But, a lot of runners have written books about races or events where they felt they changed.
Yeah.
And I came out of the grid, everything from barefoot to all these other minimalist approaches to the sport in a very different way from how I entered it. And those changes have stuck. So, perhaps that will be interesting to other people who are thinking about where to turn the knobs in terms of tech versus natural.
Well, do you think that there will be a book that comes out from the Thousand Mountains?
Yeah, I've written a number of blog posts. So I would, that experience is a lot of fun. And, I went out, I was in Arizona and spent some time reading a little bit about the Navajo culture. And there are ways to write the stories about, that weaves in what you learn about the local cultures and people. I have another book in the works. I went out and did the John Muir Trail. I did it barefoot. It took 3 years, not 3 years of constant hiking. I went out in 2020. I did 70% of it barefoot, but there were a couple spots I fell behind and I had to put shoes on. I went out again and it didn't quite I had to use shoes. Finally, in 2022, I did the whole thing without shoes. And there are so many, that one is less just about me, but there are so many cool stories of people who lived on the frontier and they had to deal with change and challenge, which we do today too. And I think we can learn the lessons of acceptance, discipline, determination, the energy we draw from nature. So many of those lessons people were learning and talking about 150 years ago. And, for example, Sarah Winnemucca, the first Native American woman to publish memoirs. And she talked about the challenges they had at the hands of the Army and other folks. And she traveled up and down the East Coast giving lectures to like 1,000 people at a time. So just an incredible communicator. And she was most upset about the lack of integrity in the dealings with the US government. And I just think it's such an important lesson to take today. If you're in a big organization, you can always have excuses and tell people what they want to hear. But when people don't stand up, don't deliver on what they said, that stings. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us. Do what you say to the extent you can, right? But make that extensive, make that big.
Yes. You're giving me this thought. So I ran with Maureen Morrissey this past weekend, and I've interviewed her on our website. She's an author, and she wrote a book called Sonder. And the main character's name is Janie, and essentially the story is that we all play a role in somebody else's movie, right, all along the way. And so you talking about meeting the Navajo while you were in Arizona, being on the John Muir Trail and going at it 3 times barefoot, your inner demon. And it feels like you're maybe inadvertently writing a movie with all of these different characters within your own movie. And I find that extremely inspiring because it feels like, Ken, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a person who is cognizant of the world around them, and you're not just blindly going through life. Would that be a correct assumption?
No, I'm as blind as everybody else. But there's a word people like to use, mindful. And when I was in the Army, we practiced mindfulness. It was the drill sergeant saying, "Pay attention to detail, Ranger." But observation, that's another lesson I took away from the grid, because when you're running, stuff is flying past you, right? And you're self-focused, you're observing yourself, right? You're observing the speedometer or the tachometer or all, the aching muscles and heart rate and everything else that you need to understand about yourself, your body, to move it from point A to point B. But there is a whole world out there. Yeah. And so going through the mountains, particularly I was injured, so I couldn't go fast, and that wasn't the point of the grid. But I began to notice the plants, the flowers, the mushrooms, the lichen, the moss, the trees, the birds, the bugs, the views. And, there's this boundary between, the self narrowly defined, your name, your serial number, right? Your driver's license, which is a real ID, so you can go on an airplane. But there's a bigger world, and we're all part of that. And so if you do pull back from the speed, you can shift a little bit to the observation. And that's why I think our the grid kind of experience, the multi-year projects, you can do running and biking and swimming and everything else just as an athletic pursuit, but it can be much more meaningful if you think about it.
From all the things that you just mentioned, moss, lichen, skies, views, did you come away with a new hobby as well? Did you become like a person who's researching birds or insects or plants?
Yeah, the book has an appendix with 300 species that I identified. Now, look, I'm not a naturalist, but with apps and friends, you can at least learn the names of the other people in the forest. John Muir used to call flowers people. He called them flower people and tree people and butterfly people. He used that phrase, and that echoes many of the Native American tribes. And you read their stories, and they start in the time when animals were people too.
Yep.
In fact, I was just reading the memoirs of a Mono Indian, and he talked about Quina, who is the eagle. And the eagle was not a spirit animal or a god or anything like that. It was a person, and it was a role model. And the grandparents used to tell the kids, Quina, that's what you're supposed to look like. And maybe not, you don't flap wings, but you soar through life. You're focused, you're determined, you're fast, and you're beautiful, right? So I think, you can start with running and hiking and swimming and then just expand to the whole world is my thought here.
I got one last question for you before we jump into some rapid fire food questions that I love to always wrap up with. So on your website, you talk about the 1,000 Mountains, and we've talked about that a little bit here. And you said on the website, it says the idea was born out of staring at embers flickering, and 341 not being a round number, and looking to get to 1,000. But 500 is a round number, so is 400, and so is 6, 7, 8, and 900. Like, why was 1,000 the number that you settled upon?
Well, remember that sign I saw at the base of Mount Hope Pass: "Go big or go home."
Yeah.
It's fine to have some drama and excitement in life, right? I didn't think of 400. But the question is, what am I going to do next? If I get close to 1,000, I could set my next goal at 10,000. That's that's not going to happen. And if you go from 1,000, you're like, now I'm going to do 1050 or 1,100. So I'm going to have to think of something new.
Do you have any idea how much elevation you have climbed?
Yes, sir.
What's the number?
Would you like to retract that question, or would you like to have the actual answer? Is 632,000 feet.
That's amazing.
And so I'm going to get to 1 million, and that's going to be cool.
Yeah.
That'll be like 2.5 years or so.
Do you know, based on the 1,000 mountains, that it will reach 1,000 feet of elevation, or will you have to go above that number? Do you have your spreadsheet with the red, yellow, and green on it?
Yeah, I can only tell you what I've done, because the 1,000 mountains, at first I was like, well, it has to be at least 3,000 feet tall or something. Right. Then I was like, dude, cut yourself some slack. So I have done Whitney and Elbert, which are 14ers and handies, but I did Joppenberg Mountain near Rosendale, New York, which is 482 feet. Now, right. I haven't done it again, but I can do anything I want. I can do the same mountains over and over and over and over again. It's just got to be called a mountain or a peak. So I won't know the actual, if I injure myself again, it may be lots of small mountains.
Yeah.
I'm heading out hopefully to New Mexico, and I want to do Tzotzil, which is the southern Navajo Sacred Mountain, which is Mount Taylor. So I'll get at least a few more 9,000 and 10,000 footers in there. But it's only the delta, right? So it's only how much I climb that I'm counting.
Right. It's fascinating. I look forward to the 1,000 foot elevation gained book that'll come out at some point as well. Well, Ken, I appreciate your time, and I love to always wrap it up with some rapid fire food questions. and I call them rapid fire. At some point, I'll have to change the name because I don't really rip through them. It's like you take your time to answer it. So I'll have to come up with something else to call it. But one of the questions I always ask is oatmeal raisin cookie or chocolate chip?
Oh, chocolate chip.
But like a chip, like a homemade chocolate chip or Chips Ahoy out of the package? Or
You
does it
know,
matter?
in the spirit of full disclosure, I used to lecture my children on the risks of sugar.
Okay.
But I'm not perfect, so I do eat a few treats. And I like chocolate chip cookies. When I was a kid, I used to get a box of Entenmann's cookies and then freeze them so they'd be a little bit crunchier. And then I eat an entire box in one sitting. So now it's a treat. But I'm not a big fan of oatmeal. So an oatmeal raisin cookie would be a big disappointment if I thought I was getting a chocolate chip cookie.
Are you a coffee drinker?
Yes, sir.
What's the order when you go to a barista and you're placing an order?
Cappuccinos, but only if they know how to make them properly. It's only 6 ounces.
Yeah.
If it's more than that, it turns into a latte.
Yes.
By the way, the best, you're in New York right now. You could change your plans. If you haven't been to Zebetto's,
I have not.
6th Avenue, go there between 56th and 57th Street. Ask for Ibrahim. He'll make you the best cappuccino in the universe. And
I will.
With a little sprinkle of dark cocoa powder on it.
We'll be back here in December, so it'll be a perfect time to get it. It'll be a little cooler, and it'll be a perfect time for a hot cappuccino at Zebetto's for sure. Yeah. We're big fans of Black Press Coffee, which is on 72nd and Columbus, a little bit more north.
Oh yeah, no, I know that place too. They make a good cappuccino too.
Yeah. Savory or sweet, if you had to choose a flavor topic for the rest of your life?
Savory.
And if you had to only eat one meal that was savory, what would it be?
Grass-fed ribeye.
Oof. Any sides on that?
I mean, if I'm allowed, I like peppers, bell peppers.
Yes.
Or some pickles.
That's pickles with a steak is an interesting combination. Where did that come from?
Chris Cornell. He's on Twitter. What's his handle? Big fat loser. He's lost 80 pounds. He's my age. He's 61 or 62. But he's a big keto person.
Okay.
So he talks about a burger with no bun and a pile of pickles on the side. And I was like, pickles. Because I don't spend a lot of time preparing food, so you don't have to do anything to pickles.
That's true. New York City. So if you had to only choose one, pizza, bagels, or cannolis, which one are you taking?
I just go on a hunger strike. I do a lot of, I do intermittent fasting regularly, and I would not eat any of those under any circumstances. And even one of the great things about intermittent fasting, and I know there are people who will tell you the scientific benefits or not. I don't care about that stuff, but it gives you the confidence. It gives you the confidence to walk past bad options and say, I'm going to wait until I can get something good. And it's back to the nature versus technology. High-tech food doesn't appear to be good for people, or some things aren't good for people. So you remind yourself, and you know this from Cocodona, food is nutrition and energy. It's not distraction.
Sure, but I'm also going to enjoy it. So I'm going to eat the pizza, the bagels, and the cannoli for you instead.
All right. So we found something to disagree.
Yeah.
On. Okay. Well, all right.
It is absolutely necessary for energy to get out there and race, but I also want to enjoy my food the way I perceive it and the way I look at it. And if I'm only looking at it from the perspective of calories or something of that nature, then food no longer has the appeal to me, and I want to be able to enjoy food. And it's been that way my whole entire life. Like I want to be able to look at it in more than just a energy component, and I think that's the beauty of different people having different opinions, right? Right. And I think as long as people are respectful of each other and they're not yelling, "You're wrong 100%," and get out of my face. I think you could probably find more common ground in conversation with respect than you will if you're just yelling at each other and pointing fingers.
But it's hard because we want to yell, and it's like back when I was running shoes, it's like you always carefully look around at people's feet and it's like, oh, they're wearing a different brand from me. We can never be friends. Not really, anyhow, if they're wearing the wrong shoe. So yeah, we got all in the age of social media, we got to all remember, try to understand where the person's coming from. By the way, if you understand my view, I sometimes just watch the fighter pilots on YouTube, and
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, I want the right kind of gas for my F-16.
Yeah, and look, everybody feels differently, right? Like I was able to get through 250 miles of Cocodona
Yep.
4.5
Yep.
days, and I ate whatever I ate during that process.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what it was because I don't remember, but
Yeah.
and somebody else is going to eat something else and get
Yeah.
through it either faster or shorter.
Yeah, the world is full of opinions. And by the way, congratulations on the Cocodona. That's really cool. That's a nice big number, and that puts you in position to say, okay, I know what I can do, and I don't necessarily need some crazy person telling me, what kind of food to. I figured out something about how to operate my platform, so to speak.
Yeah, I think if people are respectful of each other and you can have a conversation, it is what it is. Like I don't enjoy pineapple on pizza. It's not a thing for me, and it's become a running joke on this platform that we have. But I will happily sit next to you if you're going to eat pineapple on pizza while I eat a plain slice. Like that's okay. I'm not going to be like, oh no, you're a pineapple on pizza person, and we're never going to be able to eat dinner or lunch together.
But it's a real problem too, because people are naturally very tribalist, and
Yes.
the media and the politicians are expert at slicing and dicing people into different groups and pitting them at each other, and it's part of what makes life a little bit painful. So that's we're talking about, pineapple and pizza, but
right.
There are bigger topics where people really struggle. So
Yeah.
I think your advice is very sound. I figure like if I can't understand both sides of an issue, I shouldn't be weighing in. It's not about the person being evil or wrong or a barbarian. They're coming from somewhere that's different from where I'm coming from. And if I don't understand that, then, how am I going to have a productive discussion with them?
I think that's one of the beauties that I find in travel. So like I was born and raised in New York. I lived in Dallas for a decade plus. I lived in Phoenix.
Oh, I didn't know about Dallas because I go down there on business a lot. I love Dallas. Yeah. It's very different from New York.
Yeah, very different. And I lived in Phoenix for 2 years. I lived in Seattle for a year. We're working on 2 years in LA now. And you see different cultures just within the United States, let alone outside the borders of the country. And I believe that by being able to see the different perspectives that different cultures in the U.S. have, you can be a more well-rounded person and have more perspective of why people are doing things. Because I would hope that while you're living in those areas, you're having conversation with people who are local to the area, and you come to learn about the things that make them tick. And while you may not agree, I think you can come to respect them to some extent too.
Yeah, they're probably not, misguided. It's easy to say, well, that person is misguided because they don't agree with me, but probably they have some logic and some information that they're working from.
You see, and I said earlier in the conversation about being philosophical, and we've now just gone almost 4 minutes over our allotted time because of these conversations, but I think they're fascinating. And I think that the more people talk, the more they can gain perspective. And it's not about changing the other person's mind. It's about gathering intelligence so that you can ask questions for yourself to help change your own mind if need be.
And finding, the shared values too.
Yeah.
Because no matter how different you are on some things, we're all people mostly deep down, and there are going to be some shared values. And the real leaders, when we can find them, will, find ways to build some bridges. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Awesome. Ken, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I've learned so much, not just about you, but also about myself throughout the last 60 plus minutes. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, Jason, thank you. This was fun. So thank you.
Before I drop you off, where can people find your work, your books, and the things that you're pursuing?
Go to www.barefootken.com, and everything will be right there.
Awesome. Ken, have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. You too.
For those of you who have stuck around past the hour that we normally have allotted, thank you so much. time is the greatest gift that we can give to each other. And you've given me your time, which is a great gift. Thank you so much. Make sure you come back next week for the next Fireside Chat on Run, Try, Bike on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network.